Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 13.34, 300 seconds.
Oh wow, is that 5 minutes?
Yeah.
300 divided by 60 equals... You've guessed it, haven't you?
You're tapping your skull. It's like, even this in the work of a moment is nothing for Darnell.
Yeah, I'd divide. Anyway, it's time for a flash.
The angle of your fist, I've seen it at a glance. It won't reach me.
200
You don't even dodge
Actually,
it, you just look at me like, this isn't going to hit me.
How powerful would that be in Aetheral Space, like Zoom Punch from JoJo, where you use Aether to dislocate your shoulder and get the extra inch needed?
Maybe. It's situational. In situations where someone's dodged it by an inch.
Yeah, or they block your fist, but at a weird angle where they put their arms in a cross and your fist is on top, stops just before their head, and then you Zoom Punch them right in the face.
I suppose. I think you do more than just that, though.
200 years ago. I forgot this guy's voice. Mariloko, Damon said seriously, I'm going to become supreme. He stood atop one of the pillar mountains of their homeworld, Mears, the sea of clouds stretching out before him. His arms were crossed, and his pure white, curling horns glinted in the sunlight. His dark eyes stared off into the distance, as if there was something there only he could see. Mariloko said nothing at first. He just sat with his back against the wall of rock. It was not exhaustion from the hours of training that stopped the young man's tongue. He just did not feel there was anything yet to say. Damon looked over his shoulder at his childhood friend, his gaze unbreakable. Will you challenge me? He said. Present day. Nah, said Gregory Hazard. Sorry, I'm so used to that going a different way. Nah, said Gregory Hazard. Isn't he Grigory, though? Or am I thinking of Grigory Carpin, or whatever?
I think you're thinking of someone else.
I think I'm thinking of the SCP Grigory.
Yeah, this is Gregory.
Nah, said Gregory Hazard. I'm out. Morgan swung his head around to face his fellow Fays. If we don't accept the offer, he snapped, the commander's loss in the Dawn contest is assured. We have a duty. What am I saying? Taking on Mariloko was folly. Both Morgan's body and mind understood that implicitly. Teelin Jade had been much stronger than him, and the Skirnt had been torn apart by this man. There was no way Morgan stood a better chance. And yet, his mouth continued to say these words. You do what you want, Gregory said, his voice disinterested as ever, but I've got no duty to get myself killed. I only came because I was curious what would happen anyway. Gregory, Morgan glowered. I'm not curious anymore, anyway, Gregory continued, the slightest smirk on his face. Looks like you'll be dying here. Good luck. White Aether rustled. Morgan stepped forward to stop him. Gregor! Too late. See ya, Paper Moon. Within a second, Gregory's body had folded in on itself, becoming a flesh-colored paper airplane that flew almost comically out of the window. Morgan could do nothing but watch it go, hand outstretched and teeth gritted together. He was on his own. He didn't know what the hell Gregory's game was. Obviously, he took his orders from Ascendant General Toll, but that still didn't answer the question. Did Toll want Morgan dead for some reason? He doubted it. He doubted Toll had ever spent more than a minute considering Morgan's existence. Either way, though, he was in deep shit. Don't think you're allowed to run, too, Mariloko growled from behind him, deadly quiet. That pissed me off. Great. The super-strong maniac was pissed off. Just what Morgan needed. Turning slowly, he drew his saber, holding it out before him in both hands. They were trembling. Calm down, he demanded of himself. Calm down! You can do this! Mariloko wasn't a tall man, but the pressure emanating from him right now made him seem a giant. He glared at Morgan with inscrutable dark eyes. The second he moved, Morgan would move in response. He'd counter, but would he even have the chance to do that? You don't have to win, Morgan reminded himself. Just survive 5 minutes. Just stay alive. Purple Aether, just the slightest shade different from Morgan's own, crawled up Mariloko's arm. His eyes widened just a tad. His fingertips twitched. There! Unchained! F.A.! The gravity slammed into Morgan, sending him flying across the room, all the way towards the windows. If he struck them, he'd smash right through and fall into the city outside. Even then, Mariloko would come after him. He wouldn't be able to survive if he were trying to dodge the sky and traffic. Morgan flung the rope of fog he'd formed in his hands, looping it around a light fixture and stopping his flight. As his boots skidded down against the floor, however, he knew he wouldn't have time to catch his breath. Well, he wouldn't be catching his breath for 5 minutes at least, if ever again. No, no doubt, never doubt! He ducked underneath the massive set of weights that Mariloko had thrown at him, then jumped to avoid them once more as his enemy pulled them back in with Unchained. As Morgan flew through the air, he saw the weights return to Mariloko. Rather than try to throw them again, however, he simply batted them out of the way and pointed a single finger towards Morgan's flying form. Unchained, Mariloko said, his voice as disinterested as ever. Unworthy. In the split second of reaction time available to him, Morgan's eyes widened. Mariloko hadn't used this ability against Teal and Jade. Did that mean that bloody display in the arena had been him holding back? F-A-B-A! Morgan's response was purely on instinct. Spreading his hands out before him, he formed a sturdy barrier of intertwined blocks and fog. A second later, he was sent flying backwards once more as an invisible projectile slammed into the makeshift field. The barrier shattered in impact, or presumably on impact, but Morgan himself managed to escape with little more than arms aching from the impact. Little more than aching arms, maybe. He managed to escape the first shot, that is. Morgan dived to the side as an endless volley of invisible bullets slammed through space, opening up clean holes in the wall behind him wherever he dodged. Within the span of a few seconds, the room was starting to look like a piece of cartoon cheese. If Morgan took one of those shots directly, there was no way he'd be able to avoid the ones that followed. Death breathed cold upon his neck. Even as he ran for his life, however, rolling behind a bulky treadmill, Morgan considered the attack. Unchained was an ability that altered the parameters of gravity in a wide area designated by the user. Generally, the strength of area of effect abilities increased the smaller the designated area was. Was that how Mariloko was doing this? Mariloko was creating a field of repulsive gravity, shrinking it down to the size of, assumably size, of just a few centimeters across, and firing it from his finger like a bullet. Just one of them had been enough to shatter the strongest shield Morgan was capable of creating right now, so blocking was out of the question. It seemed he could fire them endlessly, too, so taking cover was just as pointless. He'd land a long shot before 5 minutes passed. This wasn't good, but still, there was opportunity here. A car passed close by the window, casting shade into the room for a moment, and in that moment Morgan moved. An alphabet, Wu Ming laughed. What's that about? They just finished another training session. In reality, an hour or so where Wu Ming dodged the whole time, and Morgan's attacks never even got close. His sword skills weren't anything to laugh at now, but he still wasn't even close to the same level. If he wanted to close that gap between himself and the man with 1,000 powers, he'd need powers of his own. Morgan nodded. A different power for each letter, he continued. Like a whole bag of tricks, so I can respond to any situation. I keep developing the alphabet according to what abilities I need to cover gaps in my arsenal, until it's complete, and I reach Zenith. Wu Ming considered it for a moment, lounging back on a chunk of rubble, before relenting with an easy shrug. Well, he conceded, only having 26 abilities seems a little limiting to me. But you do you. Morgan smirked. The genius Wu Ming truly couldn't understand the limitations of ordinary people, but that was fine. Isn't he only up to F right now?
Well,
because he created F as part of the arc.
That was 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah, right. Even if this path...
We've seen Grade as well since then. So Grade was one where if an attack
What does Grade do again?
So for every... He activates it, and for every second that he's getting hit by an attack, that attack reduces its strength by half. So it's for continuous ones that constantly hit you.
Oh, so it's a defensive.
Yeah.
Oh, you should have used that. Even if this path only led to Morgan becoming a lesser version of the fourth contender, then that was fine. So long as you're able to keep fighting, his teacher grinned. You do you. Because a lesser version of Wu Ming was still better than everyone else. Morgan spoke the letter, his eyes bulging and nostrils flaring. Jape! He'd only completed this power a few weeks ago, and it was still one he was getting used to utilizing. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Okay, so he got 4 or 5 more letters.
Yeah, we've seen I as well, was inside. You can teleport inside sealed wings.
Nice. Jape. He'd only completed this power a few weeks ago, and it was still one he was getting used to utilizing. But in this situation, he needed every advantage he could get. In that moment, as he weaved his way through the shots and approached Mariloko, the phase split in two. Oh, it's like Invoke Duplicity.
What's that?
It's a Trickery Domain Cleric D&D ability. You make a little illusory copy of yourself. Mariloko's one enemy suddenly became a team of 2, identical in appearance. They each split off in a different direction, one circling around to attack Mariloko from behind, while the other made a frontal assault. Even so, his expression did not shift. Even so, he did not panic or permit confusion. There was no point. An illusion. It was obvious. A technique to create a true replica of yourself would require much more power than this boy possessed, and would necessitate a greater condition than just calling out a letter. One of these enemies was real, and the other was not. But that didn't matter either. He just destroyed both of them. Mariloko threw his body out of the way of the... Oh, hold on.
Hmm?
Can I make a prediction, or will it ruin the fight?
Well, predict.
I bet they're both duplicates, like illusory, and the real Morgan's invisible now. It's meant to make you think he split off an illusory copy. Alright, that's my prediction.
Okay.
He just destroyed both of them. Mariloko threw his body out of the way of the incoming swords, releasing a small aether ping as he rolled back to a kneeling position. No luck there. Both the boy and his copy emitted the same sensation through the aether. To that sense, at least, they were identical. So the only way to tell the difference... Okay, so I was immediately proven wrong. So the only way to tell the difference was to take a hit? He wouldn't accept that. Unchained! Intense gravity slammed down into the ground where both of the enemies were standing, and the effect was immediate and illuminating. One of the boys dodged out of the way, lightning fast, while the other was thrown flat onto the floor. Bones audibly crunched from the pressure. That settled it then. Mariloko ignored the enemy that had dodged. No doubt it was programmed to automatically avoid enemy attacks, so that the illusion wouldn't be detected when they landed a hit. But that in itself was a flaw. The copy had dodged far too quickly, more a warping of its form than any natural human movement. He strode towards his prone enemy, his heavy feet thumping on the floor, and then hesitated. The boy was slowly getting up. That too should have been an impossibility. Mariloko had intensified gravity to such a degree that the boy's organs should have been crushed after a few seconds of exposure. And yet, even with shaking legs, he was slowly rising to his feet. Mariloko raised an eyebrow. It wasn't that the boy was getting stronger. The aether he was emitting was at the same level of potency as before. No, it wasn't that. It was unchained. For some reason, the power Mariloko was exerting with the attack was quickly and steadily lessening. Within a few more seconds, it would be nothing more than a minor burden on the boy's shoulders. I see, Mariloko grunted, his voice unchanged. Another trick. That was right, another trick. It was Morgan's ambition to never run out of them. G grade. Every second Morgan used it on a continuously striking ability, the strength of the attack was halved, able to reduce that power to 1/32nd of its original force. He'd expected it to... Oh, is that just its cap?
Yeah, the cap.
1/32nd? It would be second, by the way.
I was right the first time.
You fool. 1/32nd of its original force. He'd expected it to work on the base application of Unchained, but it hadn't been a theory he'd been eager to test. After all, if the initial activation had been enough to kill him, he'd have died then and there. Great or no. H. Heal. Well, for the moment, that was the important part of the ability. Morgan bared his teeth as his body's natural regenerative abilities were enhanced, spikes of pain stabbing into his body as his bones inched back into place. Even if he could survive Unchained, taking another direct hit would be disastrous. Only... that should have been disastrous already, shouldn't it? While Morgan had been prone on the floor just then, why hadn't Mariloko gone for the killing shot with Unworthy? The only thing Morgan could think of was that Mariloko couldn't use Unchained at the same time as another ability. A blood-stained smirk spread across his lips. Good to know. J-A-F-A! The boy's body exploded into numerous copies of himself, all of which charged, swords drawn at Mariloko, presumably with amplified fog swords.
Yes. Well, amplified Jape as well, so that's why there's so many.
Oh, I love Amplify. Is Amplify just Morgan's shitty version of XL Surge?
Yeah, basically.
Idiocy. It didn't matter how many illusions he threw Mariloko's. So basically, just using A is adding another condition, right? What's his conditions for it?
What do you mean?
Well, if you can just say a thing and make a thing stronger,
well,
everyone would surely do it. Presumably
basically.
There's a restriction. Okay. Idiocy.
It's like a charged version of it.
Gotcha. Idiocy. It didn't matter how many illusions he threw Mariloko's way. So long as they were shadow puppets, the result would be the same. Mariloko tapped his foot against the floor. Unchained. They dodged the field of gravity, half to the left, half to the right, but it didn't matter. Mariloko had already seen the one that had dodged slower than the others. He'd already seen the one that had dodged realistically. He'd already seen the one that would die. Mariloko took a single step forward and plunged his fist directly into the chest of the boy. It struck true. It found purchase, only... this wasn't right. Where his arm had impaled the boy, lifting him up into the air, there was no blood or bone. There was no death rattle. The boy just continued to look dead ahead, with eyes as cold and empty as a doll's. I see. He got me. The boy had filled this copy up with the cubes and fog he'd used earlier, creating rudimentary bones and flesh to improve the illusion. Once Mariloco had pierced the ghost puppet, that fog had constricted to bind his fist and restrict his movements. It was a good combination. That feels to me, and this is a compliment, that straight up seems like a fucking gotcha they do in Naruto. Where you like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe that. Like, it feels good. It feels shonen. I like it. That means you're coming in from behind, then. Mariloco's instincts were right on the mark. The real enemy detached himself from the crowd of duplicates, twisting in the air, B.A. as he conjured another cube and kicked it with all his might at Mariloco's exposed back. It wouldn't reach him. Mariloco's eye flicked over to spot Morgan's next attack, but it was already too late. The block was already in flight. The second Mariloco would spend destroying the restraint was a second he needed to use dodging. So you have no choice, right? Morgan's gamble paid off. Unchained, Mariloco said. Uncrowned. The block changed its path through the air, swerving to avoid striking Mariloco, and a few seconds later it started circling him instead. Oh, like an orbital. He increased like his own mass. No, Morgan realized. It was orbiting him, like a moon orbited a planet. I'm so smart. An application of Unchained that automatically blocked projectiles and turned them into a rotating shield. Binding of Isaac?
Yeah.
He smirked to himself. Good to know. Something was off here, Mariloco realized. Why hadn't the boy tried to escape by now? The victory condition for his enemy was surviving 5 minutes, not defeating Mariloco. Mariloco had made no move to seal this room, but at the same time, the boy hadn't tried to break out of it. If he'd fled through one of the windows, he could have at least turned this into a chase, greatly increasing his chances of victory. Unless this brat had another objective in mind? He was bringing out new abilities to create scenarios, forcing Mariloco to respond. An enemy he couldn't hit with his fists, so he'd have to fire at range. A projectile he couldn't dodge, so he'd have to block it. Could it be? Mariloco's blood boiled. This little shit! It could. Yes, this was an opportunity. Mariloco hadn't used Unworthy or Uncrowned at all during his match with T-Lin Jade. If Musashi had already woken up by now, he'd be going into this match without knowing about them. A disadvantage that could be fatal. So long as Morgan survived this, he could warn the commander in advance. He could just remove that 5-minute limit he set at any point, right?
Well, yeah.
Is Mariloco too proud-moded, too honor-coded? So, because I thought he didn't care about honor, right?
He says that.
He says that. So long as Morgan survived, he could warn Musashi about all of the abilities he was pulling out of this bastard. F.A.! With a roar, Morgan formed a rudimentary ball and chain of amplified fog, hurling the ball towards Mariloco. The man just stepped out of the way, letting it fly past him, his expression distinctly unimpressed. That was fine, though. That was ideal. Inside! That hadn't just been a ball Morgan had thrown towards Mariloco. It had been a hollow ball, a sealed space, one that Morgan could use inside to teleport into, so long as he was making physical contact with it. Is one of his restrictions that the ability has to correlate to the first letter that he uses? Ooh. His grip tightened on the fog chain. The conditions were met. In a flash of purple aether, Morgan teleported inside the sphere and exploded it outwards, leaping out of the smog with his sword raised high. Mariloco's back was wide open, the chain now wrapped around his legs. Forget just drawing out abilities. If he managed to bring Mariloco down here, he couldn't ask for a better result. His eyes cold and deadly, Morgan brought his sword down, uncrowned, and his own block slammed into his face, shattering his jaw. No! He needs that to eat! Jaw shattering is brutal. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I assume you're using it, hyperbole here, but like a shattered jaw, you don't come back from that. At the last second, Mariloco had rapidly accelerated the orbit of the spinning block, causing it to fly into Morgan and send him flying. Blood and teeth flew out of his mouth, a lot of flying, spraying onto the floor. He would have collapsed to the ground, too, if Mariloco would allow it. 2 punches infused with Unchained. One obliterated Morgan's saber. The other struck him in the stomach, smashing him down into the floor, cracking it from the impact. If Morgan hadn't focused all his aether into his stomach at that moment, he knew he'd be dead. As it was, he'd barely bought himself a second. Mariloco was already raising his foot up, preparing to bring it back down on Morgan's skull. The image of a bursting watermelon came to mind. So long as you're able to keep fighting, you do you. Morgan's hand lashed out, seizing hold of Mariloco's other leg. He wasn't done yet. He could still think. So long as he could think, he could fight. So long as he could fight, he could win. So win. H-A! H had been something of an experiment for Morgan, testing what kind of output he could achieve with a conditional ability. Unlike the rest of Morgan's alphabet, it was technically 2 abilities in one, depending on the target. Oh, is it heal and harm? A guy who's been playing D&D recently, clearly.
I'm not.
Oh, there's a spell like that's like heal or harm. very common. When used on allies, it healed the body in exchange for inflicting agony. When used on anyone else, it inflicted agony in exchange for healing the body. Heal, hurt. Oh, not harm. He still hadn't landed a blow on Mariloko, so there was no downside to this tactic. He'd fill the bastard with so much pain he couldn't get up. Or at the very least, he'd create an opening. He'd hear it. Any second now, the scream of pain. He'd hear it. He'd hear it. He didn't hear it. Slowly, Morgan looked up. Mariloko's face hadn't so much as twitched. Morgan Nock did not understand this man. He was an enigma. He enacted brutality at a moment's notice, but seemed to take neither joy nor sorrow in it. He didn't seem to take joy or sorrow in anything. Even now his eyes were pointed towards Morgan. It wasn't Morgan he was seeing. No. Mariloko seemed to be glaring at something on the distant horizon. Something only he could see. The foot came down and stopped inches from Morgan's face. He blinked. Huh? Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Mariloko moved his foot away and put it back down onto the ground. For a moment he just continued to stare down at Morgan with those inscrutable eyes. Then he spoke. He doesn't have emotions, by the way, viewers, because he's mewing right now.
Sigma grandson.
He does the little thing with the finger on the lips along the chin. That's 5 minutes, he said simply. It looks like you win, Morgan Noct. I'll have that woman make the arrangements. There wasn't a moment to celebrate. As soon as Morgan heard those words, the adrenaline and tension that had been driving him this far evaporated in an instant, and his head thumped down onto the floor as he fell unconscious. Popcorn.
Mariloko snorted. Without another look at his unconscious adversary, he turned and walked towards the window, looking out into the deluge of Azamha. At some point during their fight, a scheduled rainstorm had begun, battering against the windows like a legion of applause. Mariloko just glared at the world distorted by wet glass. Will you challenge me? Damon said. To Mariloko, the world had always been a simple thing. It was just space occupied by animals. The only things of value in that space were eating, shitting, fucking, and killing. The only real difference between humans and other animals was a brain deformity that made them think they were something more. Sentiment. That was the name of the affliction.
I love the idea that shitting is one of the 4 values of the world. Just a real good poop. I mean, to be fair, have you ever had a real good poop?
Yeah.
It's a nice moment.
It's like reaching the core of cursed energy.
It's not even sleeping. Shitting's what made the cut.
By that worldview, his answer should have been obvious. Yes, there was no hierarchy worth a damn other than strength, and it could only be established by challenging the one stronger than you. However, no, Mariloko said simply. I don't think I will. Damon didn't seem surprised. He just smiled that wry, sad smile of his. Why do you go so far for me, old friend? Mero shrugged with the barest effort possible. I'm your shadow, he said. I'll stretch as far as you need me to. Standing before the rain, Mariloko glared at his own reflection. Sentiment, he muttered bitterly, as 5 minutes finally passed.
Wait, is this implying that whole exchange with them had been 5 minutes in the past? Or is this saying he only now did 5 minutes really pass? Oh, no! That's awesome, though! Mariloko's not... Wait, hold on. But this does not coalesce with Make Me a Sandwich or I'll Kill You, Mariloko. What is this? Oh... See, this proves my point that Morgan's based. Of course he would spare Morgan.
Only person that Mariloko has referred to by name in the entire series
is Damien, right?
No, Morgan.
Oh, Morgan? Oh, really? What does he call everybody else?
Well,
he calls every female character woman, I've noticed.
Yeah, well, if you notice, he has never referred to any other character by their name apart from Damon and Morgan so far.
Does Morgan
even in his
Damon?
Internal narration?
I'm wondering why Morgan specifically, though. They didn't interact before the Dawn contest, did they? Or was it just like he said that after their fight just now? Like, was it an earned respect, or has it always been that way?
At the end, he said, "You win, Morgan, not."
Oh, I see. Man. Oh, he relates to Morgan because he was Damon's shadow and Morgan is Muzazi's. Oh, no! That's too cute! Dad! Stop writing Peak. I hate it. By the way, there's not another chapter because fuck you guys.
Sorry. I'm sorry that you didn't like the 300 seconds. I'm sorry.
What do you mean I like 300
I stress out about this stuff when I can't write another chapter. I had trouble.
No, it's this was a good chapter. I'm not pressing you at all. Usually when I read a fight, well, I think you've gotten better at this, right? As you've done Aether, you've gotten more into the mix of adding the character development into the fight.
I've been
like
trying to do that. Yeah,
they exchange words and they have thoughts outside the fight, and it really feels like the fight now adds to the character development. Whereas before it was like, oh great, we got to wait till they're done like punching each other to get to the good bits. And like I was enraptured. I didn't even notice the 12 pages passing until we got to the end. So you did a good job. And I would say that for like this whole last couple of arcs. I'm just teasing you. I don't mean to actually make you sad. Obviously, it's hard to write 2 chapters a week. But 2 chapters next week or I kill you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe even 3 chapters if you're feeling particularly penitent.
Hold up. He says this now. If I show up next weekend, I've got 3 chapters, he'll be like, what?
No,
I need to smoke weed. Are you crazy?
If you show up next week with 3 chapters, I'll hug you virtually.
Send me a virtual hug.
It's been hard, hasn't it?
You'll go deleting Tanany. 1%, 10% error. I could never delete Tanany.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it'll go. Man, you know I love you, buddy.
Hit like if you love your Tanany. Absolutely, I've seen there's been quite a few. Yep. Hello? Folks, I think my internet just went down. I'm sure you can still hear me, but no, my internet's still here. Still working, so I don't know. Interesting. Darnell? Are you there? My friend? How you doing? Oh, Darnell's power just went off. Okay, Darnell has lost the connection, so I'll grab a question. Let's have a look. So the one that caught my interest was, well, I'll go through a few of the simple ones. So who was the king of killers before Eli Masadora? There wasn't one before him. It was something that started with him. It's sort of his nickname. Do guardian entities have shadows? Yes, they do. They are actual physical objects once they're brought out into the world. And what was the other one that interested me? JT Kicks asks, what's a notorious serial killer's solo criminals in AS history? Well, a pretty notorious one at the moment would be the Six Dead, but I won't get into that in the question. Previously, fairly notorious one was a man called Forgiveness Irons in the UAP. He was basically a mass murderer who believed that the world was secretly governed by a eldritch sort of god called the Great Pig, which he worshipped and also thought he opposed in some sort of deluded way. And he killed a whole bunch of people with his Aether abilities until he was brought down by Nebula 1, and now he has some form of community service, which perhaps we'll see more of later. So I'm sorry that I had to kill Darnell, but I hope you enjoyed the chapter and the questions. Bye!